Directors are members of the company, so have the opportunity to vote. The only person here who can't vote tonight is Russell from the Squash Wales office. He's not a member of a squash club, and he's a member of staff, so he's the scrutineer behind the scenes who will collect the votes. I don't even see them. He'll do the honours with that. The other staff members that are here are voting members by virtue of being members of clubs somewhere in Wales, so are entitled to vote. If push comes to shove, Article 39 gives the chair a casting vote. Not something I really want to use, but it is there and there is capacity for that if necessary. As I mentioned, everyone will stay muted until we get to the point where it's appropriate for people to raise questions or speak. What I would suggest is, if you're not familiar with Zoom, we would normally ask you to put your hand up using the reactions options at the bottom of the screen. Or if you're really struggling, put a note in the chat. We'll try and keep an eye on the chat. So if for some reason you can't raise your hand, put a note in saying, please ask a question, or even put a question in the chat and we'll try and answer it as we go. And finally, if you're really struggling beyond that, wave at the screen, put your video on. We will try and spot you, but we have got 2 screens worth of people, so it might take a moment. Or if you spot a friend waving, then please wave and we will try and get to that person. But best case is use the hand reaction. That's the easiest way for us to spot. So without further ado, a couple of things just about the polling side of things. We're going to run a test poll in a moment, just a bit of fun really, just to get you in the habit of using the system. A couple of things will happen here. When we do a poll for the simple stuff, i.e. last year's minutes, that kind of thing, it'll just be a straightforward, use the poll, and you'll see the Zoom results directly. Where we have our items that are motions, and we need to include the proxy votes because that's what proxy votes are for, Russell will produce those on a slightly different graph because you've got to add in the 11 people who are not in the room. So, and obviously 11 people can't click their Zoom button. So I think if everybody's happy, and I'll just pause there for a second in case either any of the board team or staff team need to say anything I've missed. And also if there's any questions in the room, which I can't see anyone waving at me or any hands up, then we will proceed, Russ, with the very first test poll. So this should pop up on your screen or whatever device you're using. Please vote accordingly. This one is just purely for fun to make sure it works. And we won't dwell on the result too much for this. So we'll give everyone just about 30 seconds to complete these. Just give me a thumbs up when you think we're ready to reveal the results, Russell. Okay, go for it. There we go. Some very diplomatic people in the room, Roy. But otherwise, I think you came out of that okay. But okay, hopefully that has worked for most people, or at least everyone in the room, sorry, I should say. Just quickly pause in case it hasn't. Anyone wants to ask. If not, that is essentially how we will operate, except for the 2 motions where we need to include proxy votes. Okay, one other thing I just wanted to cover before we actually get into the formal part of the meeting. When we get to motions that people wish to propose, the relevant people will present them. However long they speak, I will then ask the floor. If they wish to respond to that, you'll have the same opportunity, the same amount of time to respond. What I won't do is have 10 people say the same thing. That's just pointless, but we will give people a fair chance to say their piece about whatever has been raised in the motion. So hopefully that will be the fairest way and the most democratic way of doing things for everybody. So we'll formally proceed with the meeting. And again, I'll welcome you to the AGM. Apologies, we have from 3 people, Tristan Larson from Carnarvon, David Robertson and John Holliday from Cowbridge and Midtown respectively. So thank you for those folks being in contact with us. And the first item on the agenda after that is the minutes of the AGM held in 2021, which was circulated. So we need to use the, we'll be using poll in a minute just to confirm these. But first of all, I'll just pause for a second if anybody has any questions about them or matters of clarity they wish to raise. Okay. Okay, not seeing anyone, which is a very good sign. So Russell, could you just run the poll to essentially propose and second the 2021 AGM minutes, please? Apologies, port folks, we will have a few pregnant pauses in the meeting, but we need to allow everyone a chance to click the button. We'll give about 30 seconds for each one. Okay, go for it, Russell. Okay, thank you very much. So that has passed by simple majority. That's fine. It's only really a proposal in seconds. That's fine. Thank you. Next item on the agenda then is item 4, which is the presentation of the Squash Wales annual accounts. These are, as are like the previous item, they are really for information, but we will take a poll just to make sure the membership is happy. But if I could hand the screen over to Neil, our finance director, he'll happily present those to you.
Thank you, Richard. So my name is Neil Paramore. I've been on the Squash Wales board for just under 2 years, and I'm covering the financial side of the business. I'll try and share my screen to call up the statutory accounts, just so I can talk you through some of the key numbers. So you just bear with me for a second. Okay. Hopefully everyone can see those.
Yeah.
Someone can just confirm, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so these are the unaudited accounts for the organisation for the year ending 31st of March 2022. Just to give you some background in terms of the process of how we prepare these accounts. So Russell, who's on the call, he's our business and office manager, prepares the day-to-day accounts, the management accounts. We then put them in the format for the year-end accounts, which I review. They're then also reviewed formally by the finance subcommittee, which meets on a quarterly basis. And then finally, the board itself of Squash Wales approved them as well. They meet quarterly, and we looked at these last Thursday and approved them subject to tonight's meeting. So just running through some of the sort of key numbers, just really for background, and then obviously happy to take any questions you might have on the accounts. Most of the information is sort of statutory information, such as the directors, registered office, etc. And then the first schedule of interest is, I can scroll back, I've gone a bit quick, sorry. Oops. So bear with me a second. Right. Okay, so this is the income and expenditure account for the organisation. So we're comparing 2022 against 2021, and you can see turnover figures and expenditure figures are higher than the previous year. That was obviously impacted by COVID. We started to come out of it in this financial year, so we started to obviously have more tournaments and more expenditure going through. And we were able to utilise income from grants and other sources of 374,000, up from 215,000 the previous year. So you can see the jump in activity, but obviously we're not back to where we would want to be as we were pre-COVID. So looking down at the bottom of that statement, the surplus for the year was just over 2,000, which was in line with the reserves policy approved by the organisation. So we just gradually build up reserves to cover unforeseen events that might happen in the future, just so we can cover those with the cash reserves in the future. So, as I say, overall, just a small surplus carried forward, and then, as we'll see in a second in the balance sheet, quite a lot of the grant income we received from Sport Wales we haven't been able to utilise in previous years, so we're carrying that forward in the balance sheet for use in the later periods. I think Pat is asking a question.
Yeah, you make a comment about the difference between 21 and 22 being significantly due to COVID.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest impact of COVID was 20. Do we have the figures from 20 to see what that further decline is? Because 21, we were playing quite a lot of squash.
But this is up to March 21. the prior year figure. So it covered 9 months of 2020 and 3 months of 2021.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's the income and expenditure account, as I say, for 2022. And then if we move down a couple of pages, we'll try not to scroll too far this time. Okay, so this is the balance sheet. So sorry if I'm telling you things that you obviously know, but the balance sheet looks to itemize the assets and liabilities of any organisation at a point in time. And these accounts are 31st of March 2022. So overall, the net assets of the organisation are 89,000, which is just the £2,000 higher than the previous year, which was the surplus that we saw earlier. And the key numbers in that balance sheet are the cash balance, which was 226,000, just slightly down on the prior year, 232,000. Now that's roughly 100,000 above where we'd expect it to be in previous years. And that all relates to these grants that we've received from Sort Wales in previous years that we haven't been able to utilise. So we effectively receive the cash, which goes in the balance sheet, and then we can utilise that in future years for approved purposes. I'll move on now just to one other section, and then obviously happy to take any questions. Okay, so at the bottom of this page, we have the creditors, which are the amounts owed by the organisation. The largest number there is in other creditors, which is 128,000. And as you can see in the detail note below, the vast majority of that relates to these grants that I've spoken of. So we have close to £97,000 of grants received in prior years that we haven't been able to utilise, that we're carrying forward into the current year and possibly into next year as well. So there's 97,000 there. Looking at our latest forecast, we'll probably spend around about half of that surplus in the current year and then carry forward the next half into the following year. We've been in discussion with Sport Wales, and they've given us sort of tacit approval to do that. But obviously it needs to be approved at a higher level than the representative that we have on our board. So I think the rest of it is sort of fairly strategy, it's fairly standard statutory information that we expect, but those are the sort of key numbers just to point out. Sorry, my voice is going tonight. So happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Neil. I think it may be useful for members to know that one of our largest expenditures is actually our international teams, and it's them that have been quite restricted. So even though, for example, the UK has opened up, a lot of the places they would normally have gone, they couldn't go. And a lot of the WSF, ESF events were postponed, hence why there's a lot of money carried forward, because we're expecting, well, those are starting to happen again. So that's part of the reason for that accrual, isn't it, Neil?
Correct, yeah.
Okay, just quickly check around for any questions. I can't see any. So I would just like to use the poll just to confirm everyone is happy to receive those accounts. If you could do the honours, Russell. Thank you very much, Neil, for doing those this year. That's greatly appreciated. Okay, you should be able to see the poll, so please do the honours. Good to go. All right. Thank you. Please reveal the results. Grand. Thank you very much, folks. And those are quite happy received. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you very much.
Appreciated. And so that moves us swiftly on to item 5 in the agenda. So we've got 2 sets of reports in here, which is something we share every year. So we'll start with the operations report. We'll pause to hopefully accept that, and then we'll go on to the performance side of things. So Roy, I'll hand over to you for the operations update and our activity for this year.
Yeah, so my report has been is as submitted, and obviously it's been circulated. I don't intend going through every line of the report, but I'm happy if people have reviewed it to take any questions relating to the report.
Stunned silence. So, okay. Let's, without further ado then, Russell, if you could raise the poll for approval of Roy's report. Thanks. Okay, great. Let's have a look at the results. Roy, it's a second win for you tonight. Oh, done well. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. And then next item under section 5 is Dave Evans' performance report. Over to you, Dave.
Hi, thanks, Rich. Yeah, similar to Roy, obviously everyone's had a copy of the performance report and the national coach, junior national coaches report. So happy to take any questions on that.
Okay. Looks like you might also be off the hook. Okay, gone. Right, if you'd like to run the poll for that one, please, Russell.
There is a handout.
Was it? Sorry, apologies, we've missed. Sorry, Paul, go for it.
Apologies, Richard. Dave, yeah, just a simple question, maybe a matter of clarity for me. I am a new member to Wales Squash and new to Cardiff in the last year. From a HP and a development point of view, my understanding is that Wales has its ambitions and its goals, and they go from youth all the way up to the senior levels. Just as a comment, perhaps, there might be clubs feeling that they starting players off on the road to an HP level and then losing them to groups such as yourself. And I'm talking from the point of retaining depth within the clubs and the leagues and whatnot. Can you maybe just talk to that a little bit and perhaps how Squash Wales addresses that issue?
Yeah, I'm not really sure what you mean by losing them, Paul, because we don't take them. They just come to extra sessions. Our children, ideally, we from the pathway, we want them coming from the club's junior squash setup. That's where we get them, and then they just have an extra weekly training session, an academy session with us, and the better ones then will go on to national squad sessions. So we're certainly not taking anyone. It's not like a rugby academy or anything like that where we take them and they can't go back to their clubs. We want them. That's where we get them from, the clubs.
All right, my misunderstanding then. I thought they joined. I don't know. I think it's Cardiff Club, and they kind of joined a bit of an HP squad together and played together and league together and kind of moved through the system collectively.
No, what we do, Paul, we have an academy, the Squash Wales Academy, where the boys and girls come from a junior squash or anywhere that they play there. If we think their club coaches think they're of a sort of a good enough level, they then join our academy, which entitles them to a weekly training night extra, but obviously in addition to their club sessions and their league matches and things like that. So yeah, we're not trying to. We don't take anyone or sort of keep them for ourselves or anything like that. No.
Yeah, that's my misunderstanding. Apologies then, and thanks for the clarity.
That's okay, no probs.
And I wish we had the funds, Paul, to have an entirely group of players playing full time in Cardiff, but sadly not. Okay, any other questions? Apologies, I nearly missed you, Paul. No, if not, okay then, go for it, Russ. If you could do the honours. Okay, great. If you'd like to show the result. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. Motion or report approved. Thank you, Dave. Okay, let's move then to item 6, which is the league constitution and rules. So we bring this to the meeting following its sort of due process through the league committee and the working group there. So I'm going to ask Phil Braley from the board, who's our liaison person on the league committee, to present this. And I don't doubt for 1 minute there may be some members who wish to speak on this item. So we will do the honours afterwards once Phil has introduced the item. So over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Richard. Good evening, everyone. So Richard has already mentioned this motion doesn't have any real bearing on the implementation of the Constitution and rules. They've already been passed by the league AGM and the subsequent league meeting in August and approved by the board, so they're already in place. We wanted to bring them before the membership to ensure full transparency with members who may not have been involved in their redrafting during the last year, and as a result, the board seek approval for the motion. So as a bit of an overview, the rules are designed from a governance perspective. This ensures fair play, equitable treatment for all clubs, teams and players. And whilst there are always situations where some teams are unhappy with the result from time to time, the overwhelming purpose and effect of the rules is to ensure fair play, especially for the smaller teams who may not have the depth of membership to ensure this process is maintained. The company articles require the Squash World Board of Directors to remain the custodians of squash in Wales, and they will always have overall jurisdiction on matters relating to the leagues and any other subcommittees that exist or are formed in the future. Now, you will have seen an email from Rubina Squash Club on matters relating to league squash, and as the board liaison member on the league committee, I'll briefly comment on some of the items in their letter. So their first point, as Richard said, has not been included because that is the reverse of what's been proposed. The second point was on an alleged democratic process point. And whilst we want the leagues to largely agree their own constitution and rules, the board have overall governance and liability for what happens in all areas of squash, including the leagues. So following this decision at the league AGM, we received many communication from members who were at the meeting saying that they had no idea what was agreed, confused of what was being discussed and what the outcome actually was. This was then reviewed by the board, and it was clear that there were unintended consequences of this decision that were not in the interest of the majority of clubs and our members. Therefore, the decision was overturned. A subsequent meeting was held in August, convened to explain the rationale, which was agreed in that meeting. Their next point is on non-Welsh qualified players, and the effect is the opposite of what they are claiming. This rule is particularly designed to ensure that we always put Welsh players at the forefront of playing opportunities in the leagues particularly, and not restrict that opportunity by importing a raft of non-Welsh qualified players to the detriment of our Welsh players, and especially our talented and emerging junior players. The reason they're attempting to have this rule removed is that they are the club in Wales that most stands to benefit from this rule removal, to the detriment of smaller clubs and Welsh players. And then their last point on the quota of match points and ranking list is again an attempt to manipulate these rules to their benefit. They are the largest club in Wales and are seeking to remove rules so they can have higher ranked players in lower teams to artificially strengthen those teams to win promotion, while still calling them up to higher teams where they will also win in those teams. They state these rules impose too many restrictions on smaller clubs, whereas this is the opposite, as we've removed many restrictions on smaller clubs in the lower leagues, whilst retaining them in the Premier League. So that's a brief overview of our response to the points raised by Rubina, and I now pass it back to Richard for any other comments.
Thank you very much, Phil. Obviously, there are several mentions of a certain club in there, so I think it's only fair that I give the opportunity here for a response to that to the floor. So hands up, anyone who wishes to speak. Okay.
David
Yeah,
Grant.
David
Richard.
Grant, go for it. We may just need to unmute you, David. Yeah, there you go. You're in.
Okay, there you go. All right. Philip, I just wondered whether a particular instance in my club, which is Hirwine, got 4 league teams. Constantly the Delta team, are short of players. And as far as I understand, and I'm fairly new to Welsh squash, players from a higher league are not allowed to play in a lower league. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in South Africa, where I'm from, players were allowed to play down, but a player from a higher league would have to play at number 1 in the lower league. Now, you know, the higher leagues, we've got 4 leagues. The higher leagues always have the opportunity to draw from the lower leagues if they are short. But the bottom team does not have that capability, obviously. And there are many instances where they have to field a team with insufficient players. And I think that the board maybe should give some consideration to a rule whereby a player can move down from the, say, C team down to the D team and has to play number 1. I don't know if this has been proposed before, so I'd just like your comment on it.
Yeah, I can answer that. It's a good point, David. The reason this was introduced is because it's been abused in the past, and a lot of the rules that we have in place now, because teams historically have sought to take advantage of some of these rules and abuse them. So this is why that was in place. That said, we are currently running a trial with some West Wales teams with this kind of situation in place for their lower teams to see if how that works. So the idea is that in the lower teams that may be possible, and we put a restriction on the ones that can play down and where they need to play down to, and we're trialing that at this time. So once we get the results of that trial, we're prepared to publish those to the wider squash community as to whether it's working well or not and whether it can be expanded. So you make a very valid point.
Thank you, Philip.
Okay.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Next on my list is Thomas.
Hi, I'm Tom, Swansea Squash. I just want to raise a point on the non-Welsh playing rule. We have a big influx of players from Swansea University who stick around for 3 to 4 years and then even stay in Swansea and play afterwards. Good players who'll be playing in our A team, and currently we are limited to how many we can field in one team, and we feel that's very restrictive on us, considering they're a large contribution to our club.
Yeah. Okay, Thomas. Yeah. So I think I touched on this in my comments. One of the challenges we've got is that some teams could bring in 5 non-Welsh players of high standard and play them in their club, one to the detriment of the opportunity for Welsh players, and secondly to win a league. That's not what the Welsh leagues are about. I understand your challenge, but Swansea is not the only club that they can go to, and there are several other clubs that these players can travel to and play in the vicinity. So again, this is to ensure that there's fair and equitable rules in place to make sure that there's no abuse of the process. So I understand that the challenge you've got, and I think I referred in my comments that there are some decisions that some clubs may not be entirely happy with, but we have to ensure fair play across the board in this regard.
But doesn't having a higher standard of player in the league drive the leagues anyway and pushes Welsh squash as it is?
If they're Welsh players, yes. Because otherwise, you could just have, you know, several teams of players from other countries, and it wouldn't be limited to home nation countries. You could bring players in from all over the country if they're in university. Our rules are also in line with the other home nation rules, that they do this as well. That's why if you play in a university and you do stay in the area which you mentioned, your time in university is not classed as part of your residency. And as I said, that's the same for all the home nations.
Thank you, Tom. That's a fair point. We noted. Thank you. Next person on my list is Alexander Rowlands. Go for it, Alex.
Do you want to chuck Paul on first, just because I've got like a thing to say on behalf of Rabina?
No, you can go next. Go for it.
Oh, okay. Well, good evening, everyone.
Alex, sorry, if I can jump in, it is just a comment in response to Thomas and Swansea University. Sorry, Richard, if that's with your permission.
Gents, this is not a free-for-all. We're trying to structure this meeting properly. So
Absolutely.
Alex was next with his hand up, so let's go to Alex, please.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Alex Rowlands, and I'm the club captain of Rabina Squash Club. Firstly, thanks for the opportunity to speak on this motion. For those who haven't seen the email that we sent out, Rabina Squash Club proposed that the league constitution and rules dated June 2022 are not to be adopted by Squash Wales Limited. Our objections are based on 1, the inappropriate way in which the rules were introduced and changed, 2, the inadequate consultation with clubs, and 3, the veto of rules agreed by members, which Phil has touched on. I'd like to bring to your attention Rule 2.1 in the proposed June 2022 Constitution, which reads, the member clubs of the leagues will be able to submit proposals and amendments or changes to the rules and or structure of the leagues for prior discussion and then ratification at the annual general meeting. All final decisions on changes are subject to the approval of the Squash Wales Board of Directors. Firstly, we feel that it is the members' clubs that should be submitting proposals for any changes or amendments to rules. However, Squash Wales themselves have proposed multiple additions and amendments at each meeting. We feel that there wasn't sufficient explanation or time to question, understand, or digest to make a fair judgment of Squash Wales' proposed rules, nor adequate discussion allowed at the meetings in order to truly understand what was being proposed. Secondly, where a member club had proposed changes to the rules, i.e. removal of Rule 5, and voted in favour of its removal, this was then vetoed by Squash Wales at the August League meeting. Squash Wales then went on to propose new rules to be added to further remove flexibility on its members' clubs. Thirdly, Squash Wales argue that the only use of the final line within Rule 2.1, which reads, all final decisions and changes are subject to approval by Squash Wales Limited Board of Directors, would be to veto an inappropriate or legal proposal from members as a fail-safe, but the rule was invoked in rejecting a rational proposal from members that had been approved at the June 2022 AGM. Across sections 2, 5, and 7, there are currently 35 rules which all restrict players from playing squash within Wales. With the addition of individual squash memberships imposing with the addition of individual squash memberships, imposing this many rules cannot be allowed to continue if we as member clubs are able to introduce new players, raise the standard, and encourage new members to return to team squash. This will only be possible if we can have confidence that Squash Wales will accept decisions that member clubs propose and vote for when making suggestions to amend or remove rules. The first step to making this possible is to vote against the adoption of the current squash rules and constitution to allow for all the member clubs to work with Squash Wales to build a rule book and constitution that encourages inclusivity, fairness, and follows a proper democratic approach. That's the formal bit.
Okay, well that's the same time that Phil had to introduce the motion.
Can I just quickly say just some personal things back to Phil from what he said?
30 seconds so that we're fair to all parties.
Yeah, obviously he's mainly commented on the fact that we're the biggest club and that we'll benefit the most on these rules. To be honest, the majority of the responses I've had are from smaller clubs with less teams, and they're the ones who have been more in favour of not adopting this approach because they feel that they just cannot, especially across Rule 5, they just can't, field enough teams. They haven't got enough flexibility. So I personally, I think that in itself explains that, or just shows that that's not the case, really.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for your thoughts. Paul, let's go to you next. You're next in line.
Richard, thank you. Just frankly, more of a comment and proposal to take forward. I'm a big believer that the intent of the rules are very important, and I'm very aware of Philip's point that some of the rules have been made in response to situations and events that were raised. In the situation of Thomas's, and we faced very, very similar experiences, and like David, I'm from South Africa and involved with Squash South Africa. Universities and development teams really struggle to field players. I think to support those universities, I would like to propose keeping the rule as is, but proposing a waiver of that rule. In their case, as university significantly far away from a border that people can't drive over for a league fixture. And obviously with the understanding that if that is abused, there will be recompense and consequences to the team and the club. I think getting players on court is ultimately everybody's goal here, and that might be a way to encourage that.
Okay, so to summarise, essentially, you think we should have a closer look at the university piece and how that could work?
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. No, that's fair comment. We'll take that on board. And full disclosure, I do have some experience in the university world.
Just a bit.
So next on the list is Pat. So please go ahead, Pat.
Hi, good evening, Pat Westlake, Old Pens. We're a much smaller club. We currently run 3 teams, but that actually comprises 2 of the old Barry teams. We don't play in Prem. I've had a good look at the rules. I've also had a good look at Alex's proposal. And having been to all the recent AGMs, even when we were back as the counties, the point I'd like to raise is a fairly simple one, and that is I question where Squash Wales gets its mandate. Squash in Wales is played by the squash players in Wales. The vast majority of those do not play at Premiership level. The vast majority play at very small clubs, and a huge proportion play out of leisure centres. I believe the figure it was as high as 80% with the closure of leisure centres post-COVID. I don't know what that figure is, but it's going to be the majority. Those clubs perennially struggle to exist, and therefore they get players where they can get players from. I do feel, as I say, as a smaller club, that the rules are restrictive in terms of being able to put teams in, week out. I was particularly disappointed, and I've talked to quite a few different clubs, and the sentiment is the same. We were very disappointed in how the original AGM was run. The fact that there were multiple motions on a single slide, and you voted effectively for the slide. When that was rejected because people were complaining they didn't realise what they'd voted for, we didn't re-vote on those on a single point-by-point basis. And I hold Squash Wales responsible for that, because I think that a lot of the confusion that came about, and I take the point that was mentioned, that feedback on that AGM was that people didn't realise what they'd voted for. Well, how could you? Because the AGM was very poorly run at that point, and we weren't given a chance to re-vote on exactly the same stuff on a point-by-point basis, where perhaps the flavour of the club sentiment would have been better represented. I do worry that Squash Wales, whilst trying to drive forward the standard of squash in Wales, is now losing the confidence of the clubs, because it doesn't represent the clubs, it represents Squash Wales. And the mere fact that Squash Wales has vetoed the club's vote, that is just tantamount to a demonstration that whether Squash Wales like the club vote, they think they're better than the clubs, and they think that as a small minority, because there are what, I don't know, 4 or 5, I don't even know how many people there are on the Squash Wales board, but you were outvoted by the clubs. And you shouldn't get annoyed with that fact and overturn it because you think that the club's got it wrong. The clubs voted for how they want to play squash in Wales, and like it or not, you've got to listen to that.
Okay.
I can answer that, Richard.
I'll just say something in response to that part first, if that's okay, Phil.
Yeah.
I think, Pat, I'd hope you appreciate we walk a difficult line as a board at times, in that we have multiple masters, both our members and funding partners, etc. And the concern we had around that original AGM is, as you've stated, there was some concern about how it was run and how the voting happened. So that is exactly the case in point of why the board need that oversight, to actually give the opportunity to go back and say, look, something's not right here. We need the clubs to have a better understanding of what they're voting for. And that was our reason for doing exactly that at the subsequent board meeting. So I think that is a really good example of why the structure is how it is. So I'll hand back to you for the respond to the rest of that, if you wish.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So the one point I would make, Pat, is that you're not correct. We have listened to our members. We have retained a lot of the rules for the Premier Leagues and feeder leagues, because that is the top end, the elite of squash in Wales. And we have relaxed quite a number of rules. And if you read all the rules, you will see that they're in there. We've relaxed a lot of the rules. And I spoke earlier about running a pilot where we're looking to allow people to play down as well as play up. If you've got any more ideas for us to consider where we can help clubs that are struggling without compromising the rules that protect everybody, we are very willing to listen. We have already made changes in the lower leagues to help clubs. So I think it's a bit unfair to say that we haven't considered that. We have, and we will continue to do that. I think I think you're right, Pat. Most people just want to play squash and have a pint with their mates afterwards in a club after they've finished. And that's what we all want to do. But we have to make sure everybody plays by a set of rules. That's why, everybody knows the rules in a football match. Why do you need a referee? So those are my comments on that.
Okay, thank you. I will just hang on. Pat, do you want to come back? Give me 1 second. I'll just check no one else wants to come in. Okay, Pat, come back quickly, and then we'll
I thank Phil for his response, and I do agree with some of his points. One of the issues I have is there aren't enough, as a straight suggestion, Phil, because you asked, there are too many rules that govern all 7 divisions, in South Wales. Whereas I know that there are some, like the Welsh rule only applies to Prem, that's fine. I do think we should split 1, 2, and 3 from 4, 5, 6, and 7, and you can do that split across the other counties accordingly to allow things like not 5 and tied in the lower 2 or 3 divisions in each area, for instance, and to blanket, therefore, reject the clubs. The club rejected that rule because it stops them putting teams out. So rather than come back and consult, you just said, nah, we won't want that. We do feel as a set of clubs, and we do talk, just as you do, Squash Wales has been really heavy-handed this year. And I know you think you haven't, but the feeling I get, and I talk week in, week out with the clubs, the feeling is Squash Wales have been really heavy-handed, and they've railroaded through a load of stuff that a huge number of the clubs really weren't very happy with, because it was seen as being, this is how we want to play squash in Wales.
Okay, all fair comment, Pat. Thank you for your contribution. That's appreciated. And I take that on board as chair, because obviously I'm not in the detail of the leagues and feels our representative there. Are there any others who wish to comment on the motion as it currently stands? If not, hold your peace and we will proceed. Oh, no, James Powell, go for it.
Come off mute, Jim.
Just a quick one about the standard of players and non-Welsh players. I can see the problem of clubs buying people to travel over here and win a league that way being a problem, mostly because that would involve players who you can't guarantee would be a long term. They might just come for a season and ruin it. They're not being able to just play in the last 3 if you haven't been playing all season rectifies that, I think, a little bit. I mean, if they want to pay someone to come and play for a full season, I would be in favour of that personally. But my main point would be that if somebody is resident in Wales, just living in Wales, I don't see any reason why we would be afraid to play them. I don't see how it's detrimental to anyone. It doesn't hurt me if I have to end up playing 5 instead of 3 or 4 in a team, or if I have to play 1 in the team below. it doesn't matter if there's somebody living in Wales wants to play. I know you say there's other clubs and you're allowed one anyway, but if there's two brothers came or a whole family came and all wanted to play for one club, or a group of friends that wanted to play for one club and they weren't Welsh but they lived in Wales, I think we should let them. And if it raised the standard, I it's the problem with the Premier League. There's people think we should kick the foreign players out of the Premier League and somehow that would make the English team better. I don't see how it works, in my opinion, that way. I think not only is it the right thing to do to let them play, but I think it's also beneficial to the Welsh players. And that was it.
Okay.
Yeah, James, just a quick point on that. Having spoken to a number of other clubs, they said, the bigger clubs can afford to do that. We can't. And then what happens is those players come in, they win every week, and it distorts the leagues. So
yes.
I think that's probably
so with the residents, I don't think any club is going to pay someone to come and live in Wales. So I would go back to that point about just being, if they're resident, I don't think that
we have that in place. We have a residency rule that's the same for all the home nations and seems to be the same across European squash in terms of if you're a resident, this is what you need to do. And then that's fair and equitable for everybody.
Okay. Thank you, James. Alex, you want to speak again? Can we keep it brief?
Yeah, just on the residency thing. I mean, the residency rule is 3 years continuous living. That what James is trying to say is that should just be, if you have a Welsh address, that's that. We have multiple players who are being told they can't play for our club or up in one of our teams purely based on they haven't been here for 3 years, even though they live here. They're going to be living here for however long they want to. I don't see why that rule's in place at all. But,
okay, they can't play for your Premier League team, right?
Well, if they're Prem standard, then...
Yeah, okay. Just for clarity, though. Okay, right. James, you've still got your hand up. I'm assuming you've said what you want to say.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah, okay,
I'm not
right, fine.
savvy.
No, that's fine. Okay, I didn't want you to not have the chance to speak. Fine. Without further ado, then, Russell, let's do the poll on this, please. Now, just a reminder, this and the next motion have some proxy votes. There's 11 proxies received, so you will see the results in a slightly different format because we need to add those people in. You should now be able to see the poll on your screen. For the record, the proxy votes will be listed in the minutes, so you'll be able to see who the proxies are, just for the avoidance of any doubt. This one requires a little bit more work for Russell, so I've got to give him a minute to do the honours here. Okay, here we go. All right. So total votes for and against. Oh, here we go. It's on the left-hand side. Hopefully everyone can see that. 24 for, 11 against, 3 abstain. Okay, so I believe that motion is carried. So thank you very much, folks. I think, yes, that motion is carried, but the points made are very valid. So obviously they'll be captured in the minutes. We've recorded the meeting, and we'll discuss that as a board next time we meet in November, and certainly thrash out some of those items. And I think that the piece around the eligibility is quite interesting. And certainly from my perspective, I do understand, particularly those that have students nearby, that's an interesting group for us to work with. There's a number of other issues around students, which we can delve into outside of this meeting, where they do and don't fit in terms of things like censuses and things, but whatever. But thank you for that, folks. Thank you for that. It's a good discussion. I'm glad we've had the opportunity to have your say. Right, we'll move to item 7. I'm not sure we'll get the same amount of discussion on this one, but I'll hand over to Neil for the appointment of our accountants, which requires the approval of the AGM.
Okay, thanks, Richard. Yes, just a very simple one. We've used Gate for a number of years now to prepare the statutory accounts that you saw earlier. So we're just asking for approval to continue that relationship. We're very happy internally with the support we get from them, and their fees checked against other comparatives, and it's certainly a market level. So I'd ask for approval for that, please.
Could I ask you one question? Sorry to put you on the spot, but you will know the answer better than anyone, because officially we used to appoint our auditors. We now only appoint our accountants, and I believe that's because of the way the finance regs now work in terms of our reporting needs. Is that correct?
I think basically you should have been appointed accountants previously, so the accounts have never been audited. So I think it's just an
so just in case anyone,
wording. So
in case anyone has picked that up from the articles, there is a difference there, but it is accountants that we need. So Russell, if you could do the honours, unless anyone has got any vehement objections to Arthur Gate or works for a competing firm and wants to pitch for it. But if not, run the poll, Russell, please. Thanks. I'm going to give Russell a moment here because there are proxies for this one as well. Okay. Grand. Thank you very much. That one's most definitely carried. So thank you very much, everyone, for doing the honours with that. We'll continue with Arthur Gate for another year. Thank you, Russell. That's much appreciated. Okay, that brings us to item 8, which is any other competent business. I haven't received any in advance, Russell. I don't know if you have, but I'm prepared to open the floor to any questions that any members may have that may be relevant. And while you've got the board in the room, or some members of the board in the room, and you want to ask a question, please do take the opportunity. Preferably not about league details, though, because we think we've had that discussion. But anything else is, I think, is fair game.
Hand up, Richard.
So go on, Pat. Go for it.
Yeah, this is just to say a big thanks to Nick for all the work he's been doing on the league front. They're very, very smoothly organised this year, and they're running really well. So thank you, Nick Edwards.
Grand. Yes, thank you, Nick. And I believe that we've got a couple more teams than we had in the spring, which is good. So thank you. Anyone else for anything else? No. If not, oh yeah, Paul, go for it.
Sorry, just a question of understanding. Again, the new guy. I believe you've dissolved, and forgive the term if it's incorrect, dissolved the regional representation. So you got the clubs and then Squash Wales. It's quite a big country. Can I ask why that decision was made, just so I understand the context?
Yeah, it's not quite as you described. What we did 12 months ago is we moved to a new membership structure, which is a per person membership. Historically, it used to be via a club, and then the club would tell us how many members they had. And one of the fundamental issues that gave us is we actually never had direct contact with our members, or it was all reliant on clubs passing on information. Likewise, those clubs then formed various regional groups, which were quite historical in context as well, and didn't really reflect current sort of borders and structures. So that is very much driven as a need for us to engage with members directly, as we're doing tonight. We never would have had 50 people at an AGM previously. If those regional groups still wanted to exist, they can. We don't stop them. If they want to organise something, that's absolutely fine. There was never an intention of sort of custom side entirely. But in terms of our relationship as a governing body with individuals, that's why we went to that route, and that's something we did, let's say, 12 months ago. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you.
No problem. Paddy? Paddy Tyler, go for it.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Oh, hi. Just raising the issue again about the referee costs. I still haven't had feedback on that. I mentioned it on 2 AGMs. It's been, I mean, it's not the value, but it's just the fact that people have to pay twice as much to become a referee, and it's just an off-put. I can't get people to do it, and they say, why do you have to pay twice as much? I've asked for feedback. I've been promised it twice on 2 AGMs, and nobody's got back to me still about it.
I don't remember that from the last AGM, Paddy. Apologies, or the one before.
Yeah, Nick,
but I
Nick
will
was supposed to
happily.
get back to me.
Sorry?
Nick was going to get back to me. He said, I just thought it just seems that, you know, it just seems to be a disincentive for people to become referees because they just feel like, why should I pay twice as much membership to do something that's generally felt as a bit of an onerous task within the team, you know?
Yeah,
I think, Paddy, one of the main reasons, if you want to, is to get the referee point. And if you think what that means for a team over the course of a year, it's significant. That in itself is worth the additional cost. There are other benefits in terms of the access to some of the training materials that you can get. So I think overall it's not a significant additional cost. And those people who think it's worth it will do it. If they don't think it's worth it, they won't.
Roy, do you want to say anything about WSO and the link to refereeing, etc.? At that point, that's probably a good juncture to.
Yeah, longer term, obviously, you know, fully accept, obviously, Paddy's concerns in his sort of area. Longer term, as obviously, you know, Rich, Squash Wales are actively in discussion and looking at means of how Squash Wales can join the wider WSO remit, which will allow further benefits specifically aimed at refereeing. Currently, those discussions are taking place, and hopefully there'll be a resolution within the next few months to be presented, you know, to the membership, ready for the new sort of membership in April 2024. But those sort of benefits, it is a yearly fee. It does involve access to current interpretations, videos, and is a major driver for both WSF and PSA to basically uniform refereeing across the world, really. But there is sort of the devil's in the details how Squash Wales are going to transfer from their current system over to that sort of platform and the metrics on how it's actually going to work.
So, Paddy,
that's interesting, that is, because I tried joining something on the WSO or something, and I put all my details in, never heard anything about it at all. I don't know, you know, how that sort of works. You know,
yeah, well, if you've got specifically linked to, obviously I've got contacts within WSO. Yeah. I believe there's like 3,000 people virtually signed up already. Right. There were minor snaggings, but there are actively people from Squash from Wales that are on the WSO site that have actually been able to join, sign up, and progress through the list. But there are like pending sort of areas, because this is where the link needs to be firmer between Squash Wales and WSO. And as of yet, Squash Wales have not signed like this sort of memorandum of understanding to fully endorse and work with WSO. But those discussions are going on in the background.
Okay, thanks, Roy. The other thing I wanted to mention, if I could.
Oh, come on, two for the price of one, Paddy. Go for it.
The only thing I was going to mention, is there any way of Squash Wales being able to sort of like negotiate some sort of deal to get like equipment for clubs and things like that, like squash balls, for example? With you being a governing body, would you be able to do something like, you know, in terms of getting, you know, a better cost, really? Because as an individual club, it's much more difficult to get, you know, the cost of items, whereas if you're buying them in bulk, is a lot cheaper. And then we could buy from you, for example. Would that be something that could work?
Yeah. Again, I'll pick that up, Rich. Thanks. Those are, you know, very, very, you know, fair point. Those are discussions going on in the background with various sort of suppliers the metrics on exactly how that would work, especially in the line of sort of squash balls. But Dunlop are the market leaders. They've got obviously a little bit of a hold in the ball market. There's various other companies trying to get different ball makers desperately trying to get in in every federation. But those discussions are going on in the background. But there's further discussions to be had. That's all I can say at this time. But we are in discussions with them.
Thanks, Roy.
Yeah, I think I'll add a little bit to that, is that there's a significant push coming, isn't there, Roy, from WSF about using the right ball for the right type of player and actually increasing people's enjoyment of the game. And I think that is leveraging that discussion that actually you don't necessarily need your Dunlop double yellow dot for certain things, and therefore there may be other manufacturers who we go to for other things to try and break that hold that they've really got over the market.
Okay, thank
Anything
you.
else, Paddy? Do you want, in terms of the referee piece, are you happy with what you've heard, or do you want more information? Or
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I mean, reffing for years and that, and it's just, it's difficult to get players just for availability to get them to do reffing. I know what Phil's talking about with the point and that, but I can tell you for at our level, those are things that are not of a concern to us really. Getting an extra point for winning a match and that, those things are not what we're concerned about. What we're concerned about is, things like costs and, trying to run things and get things organised, get teams out, that sort of stuff, and make, that's what it's like for us.
I'm sorry, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And I don't want to drag the meeting on here in terms of nitty-gritty detail about your particular club. We have a new club liaison officer post that's just closed, so there'll be someone appointed in the near future. I think there's a conversation needs to be having about where you can source funding for perhaps some of those things.
Okay.
And linking you up with, so that the cost is not necessarily coming from us, but there are other pots that we should be tapping into.
Okay.
Exactly that. And we just may not have been making that connection for you.
Oh, well, that sounds...
Keep that in mind. We've got, the interviews were happening, I think, next week, a week after next. So that post is coming online in the near future. I think that's a good thing for them to start with. So,
okay.
Next person on is David Breach. Go for it.
David?
Yeah, go for David. We can see you.
I think he may have frozen.
He may have frozen. David, if you can hear us, type your question in the chat and we'll try and answer it there for you. Oh, David, we lost you completely there. Can you just say that again?
No, David, can you type it in the chat? Because we can't hear you.
Okay.
Sorry, David. If you can't put it in chat, drop us an email. We'll promise we'll answer your question. I'll personally answer it if necessary. I don't want to not have the opportunity, but we can't hear you very well. Okay. Just give David 30 seconds. Oh, David Grant. Okay, this is going to be the last question of the night. Go for it, David.
Not really a question, Richard, just a thought.
Okay.
And Paul Vermaak will bear me out on this, but in squash in South Africa, found that they were losing their older players who found that they couldn't keep up with league standard. And as a consequence, Masters squash is as strong in South Africa as league squash. There are many tournaments and in fact Masters leagues run in South Africa, and it's a way of retaining the older players who feel that they can't keep up with the younger players. And a second thing, as an adjunct to that, doubles is very popular in South Africa. Paul's giving me the thumbs up there. And that's another way of retaining older players. In fact, in my own club, I started a tournament called the Century Tournament, which required two players to add up their ages to add up to 100. So, a 60-year-old could play with a 40-year-old, or a 70-year-old play with a 30-year-old. And this had the double benefit of joining young players with older players and breaking down those sort of silos that you have in clubs, where the youngsters don't talk to the old guys, and it just socializes the club a lot better. So it's just something that perhaps you could give some thought to. I mean, I'm the oldest player in our club, and I have to play in the Masters regional leagues in England, and which are very well run. And I think that I wish there were more Masters tournaments in Wales. So just something for you to think about.
You've
That's
probably
Thank
set
you.
Roy up. Roy, can we announce what I think you want to announce here? Masters events.
I'm just waiting for some clarification, but
Okay.
yeah, the principle, 100% agree with David. But the principle of us having a Masters circuit for this season, that's like 95%, set in stone. With the first tournament being in Wrexham next month, to be honest. So that Wrexham event 100% will be advertised tomorrow. Actually, I'm just having the logistics of the other two regional events to back up our open and close. So for this season, we'll have our own little circuit of 5 Masters events for this coming season.
There you go, David. So that's a very timely question, and there's some good news attached to it for some Welsh specific Masters events. David Breach has put his question in the chat, so perhaps Dave or Greg, you could answer this, and then that will be the end of proceedings tonight. And he just says, I want to express my concern about the lack of juniors in Wales outside Cardiff and Merthyr, and the lack of coaches in these areas. I know of no coaches west of Bridgend at the moment running junior squash sessions. So, Dave, do you want to take that as a first?
That's 100%, Dave. That's an area that's been highlighted from Squash Wales, is the lack of the workforce, and not just west of Bridgend, but that's in general where I live, Pontypool, Abergavenny, and that's a big drive that we're going forward to try and get as many coaches, quality coaches, qualified as possible. The hard part is getting them qualified, okay, but the time that they've got to put in, that they're available to put in. So point sort of noted, and it's an area that we are, currently working on to try and do that, but not just west. It's all over Wales, to be honest with you. That's a big area that we focused on. We have run more coaching courses in the last 3 months or 4 months. Roy's probably got the figures than what we did in the whole of last year. But obviously it takes time to build these coaches up to be quality coaches. And try and persuade the ones that are already highly qualified to get back into coaching. And, like you say, it's a thankless task, sometimes the time they have to put in as well.
Dave, it may well be pertinent here, if you haven't seen in Roy's report, the 2 posts that we are hiring that are essentially replacing our old regional development posts. One is sort of schools and juniors type development officer, and the other is clubs. So we're changing the focus of those roles, but one of them is specifically around junior squash, to try and address some of those shortfalls. They're not going to have a magic wand to be able to travel all over Wales, but we are having someone with some dedicated time to essentially build off the good work that has gone on around the school sports survey delivery into schools. So hopefully that starts that pathway for those juniors. Okay, folks, if that is everything, I think we'll conclude proceedings there. Thank you very much for your time. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for all your comments. All very amicable and for the benefit of squash. So thank you. And best wishes for those that are playing league matches tomorrow night and onwards. Good luck. And I do want to just propose before we close, unless anyone has any vehement objections, that we set a date here for next year. So there is no issue around timing of announcement. And I'm proposing that we do this meeting on a Monday again on the 2nd of October 2023. So unless anyone wants to stick their hand up and say that's a disastrous date, I propose that we put that in the minutes and we stick to it so that everybody is aware of it a year in advance. So I'm happy to just take thumbs up or nods. That's fine. Yeah, okay, let's do that then. Let's agree that now. That'll go around in the minutes to members so that everyone can put a date in their diary for the biggest event of the year. So thank you very much, folks. Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers all.